In the middle of the towering corporate lobby, 7-year-old Dorothy clutched a crumpled envelope like it was her last treasure. She had crossed the entire city just to hand it to CEO Kevin Barton himself. But the moment Kevin knelt and met her bright blue eyes that looked exactly like his, everything around them seemed to stop. One letter, one strange child, one truth buried for years, and this moment would change all three of their lives forever. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. It was a Monday morning in Seattle, and the lobby of Barton Tech looked exactly like it did every other Monday. Cold, efficient, and untouchable. The 40-story building stood like a steel giant against the gray sky, its marble floors reflecting the harsh white lights overhead. Security guards nodded at employees streaming in. Heels clicked. Briefcases swung. Everyone had somewhere important to be, except for the little girl standing in the middle of it all. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dark curls fell in messy spirals around her shoulders, tangled like she'd forgotten to brush it that morning. Her bright blue eyes, wide and striking against her dark skin, swept across the massive lobby with a mixture of fear and determination. She wore a faded light blue cotton dress and an oversized cardigan that had seen better days. But what really caught people's attention wasn't her clothes. It was the envelope clutched in her small hands. She held it like it was made of glass. Like if she let go, the whole world would shatter. Margaret Harrison had worked the reception desk at Barton Tech for nearly 8 years. She'd seen thousands of people walk through those doors. Executives, investors, journalists, angry ex-employees. But she'd never seen a child walk in alone. Not like this. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her professional smile faltering. "Sweetie, are you okay?" The little girl didn't answer right away. She just stood there, staring up at the gleaming letters on the wall behind Margaret's desk. Barton Tech. Then she walked forward, slowly, deliberately. When she reached the desk, she had to stand on her tiptoes to see over the edge. "I need to see the most important person in this building," she said. Her voice was small but steady. There was no hesitation in it, no childish uncertainty. It was the voice of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. Margaret blinked. "Honey, are you here with someone? A parent? A teacher?" The girl shook her head. "Is someone meeting you here?" Another shake. Margaret's stomach tightened. She glanced toward the security desk, then back at the girl. "Where's your mom?" For the first time, the girl's composure cracked. Her lips trembled. Her eyes went glossy. "My mom." She paused, swallowing hard. "My mom might not be able to write any more letters." The words hit Margaret like a punch. The girl placed the envelope on the desk with both hands, treating it like something sacred. Margaret looked down at it. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like it had been written by someone whose hands wouldn't stop trembling. But the words were clear. Kevin Barton, urgent and private. Margaret's breath caught. Kevin Barton, the CEO. The man who didn't take unscheduled meetings. The man whose calendar was booked 6 months in advance. The man who once refused to meet with a senator because he didn't have time for politics. And this little girl, this fragile, determined little girl, wanted to see him. Margaret should have followed protocol, should have called security, should have told the girl to wait while she contacted child services. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way the girl's hands shook as she stepped back from the desk. Maybe it was the quiet desperation in her voice. Or maybe it was the envelope itself, wrinkled, worn like it had been carried for days. Margaret picked up the phone. Not the main line, not security. She dialed Kevin Barton's private line. It rang twice before his assistant picked up. "Mr. Barton's office." "This is Margaret from the main lobby," she said quietly, her eyes still on the little girl. "I know this is unusual, but there's a child here. She has a letter addressed to Mr. Barton. It's marked urgent." There was a pause. "A child?" "Yes. She's alone. And I think he needs to see this." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Hold on." Margaret waited, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The lobby buzzed around her, people passing, phones ringing, elevators dinging. But all she could focus on was the little girl standing in front of her desk. The girl wasn't crying. She wasn't fidgeting. She was just waiting, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. The phone crackled. A different voice came through, deeper, colder. "This is Barton. Margaret's throat went dry. She'd worked here for 8 years and had never spoken directly to the CEO. "Mr. Barton, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation in the lobby. A young girl, she can't be more than 7, came in alone with a letter for you. She says it's urgent." Silence. Then, "What's her name?" Margaret looked at the girl. "Sweetie, what's your name?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. Dorothy Cromwell." Margaret repeated it into the phone. Another long silence. "Send her up," Kevin said. Margaret's eyes widened. "Sir?" "You heard me. Send her up. Now." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone, stunned. In 8 years, Kevin Barton had never agreed to see someone without an appointment, let alone a child he didn't know. She looked back at Dorothy, who was watching her with those impossibly blue eyes. He wants to see you," Margaret said softly. Dorothy's shoulders sagged with relief. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse right there on the marble floor, but she didn't. She straightened her cardigan, clutched the envelope tighter, and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Margaret stood, her hands trembling slightly as she walked around the desk. She placed a gentle hand on Dorothy's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart, I'll take you to the elevator." As they walked across the lobby, people turned to stare. A child in this building was already strange. A child walking toward the executive elevators was unheard of. Margaret pressed the button. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss. Dorothy stepped inside. Margaret crouched down, meeting the girl's eyes. "You're very brave, you know that?" Dorothy didn't smile. She just nodded. The doors began to close. And as they did, Margaret found herself whispering a prayer she hadn't said in years, because something about this felt bigger than a letter, bigger than a meeting. Something about this felt like fate. On the 40th floor, Kevin Barton stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, staring out at the gray waters of Elliott Bay. His reflection stared back at him. Sharp suit, cold eyes, a face that hadn't smiled in years. He'd built this empire from nothing. Barton Tech was worth billions now. He had power, influence, control, but none of it had ever felt like enough. Behind him, his assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Barton?" "The girl is on her way up." Kevin didn't turn around. "Thank you, Linda." The door closed again. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. They were always steady. But for some reason, right now, they felt cold. A child. A letter. An urgent request. He didn't know why he'd agreed to this. He should have told Margaret to call social services, should have had security escort the girl out. But when he'd heard the name, Dorothy Cromwell, something inside him had shifted. He didn't recognize the name, but something about it felt familiar. The elevator dinged. Kevin turned, the doors slid open, and Dorothy Cromwell stepped into his office. For a moment, neither of them moved. Kevin stared at her, and then his breath caught. Because those eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, weren't just familiar, they were his. What connection does this little girl have to Kevin Barton? And why does looking at her feel like staring into a mirror of his own past? Please leave a comment and keep following this story. Kevin Barton had faced down hostile board members, cutthroat competitors, and billion-dollar lawsuits without flinching. But right now, staring at the 7-year-old girl standing in his office doorway, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Unease. Dorothy took a small step forward, her worn sneakers silent against the polished hardwood. She looked so out of place here. This tiny figure in a faded dress, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and the cold efficiency of power. Kevin's office was designed to intimidate. The massive walnut desk, the leather chairs, the view of Elliott Bay stretching endlessly behind him. Everything about this space said, "You don't belong here unless I allow it." But Dorothy didn't look intimidated. She looked determined. Kevin found his voice first. "You're Dorothy." She nodded, clutching the envelope tighter against her chest. He gestured toward one of the chairs across from his desk. "Sit down." Dorothy walked forward with careful steps, like she was walking through a museum. When she reached the chair, she had to climb up slightly to settle into it. Her feet dangled above the floor. Kevin sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Those blue eyes, the exact shade of his own, the shape of her chin small but stubborn, even the way she tilted her head slightly when she was thinking. It was like looking at a ghost or a mirror. "How old are you?" Kevin asked, his voice quieter now. 7, Dorothy said. I'll be 8 in December. December. Kevin's mind flickered to a date, December 15th, but he pushed the thought away. And you came here alone? Yes, sir. Does anyone know you're here? Dorothy hesitated. My mom knows I was going to try, but she couldn't come with me. Why not? Dorothy's hands tightened around the envelope. Her knuckles went white. Because she's too sick. The words landed heavily between them. Kevin leaned back in his chair, studying her. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging. She was just waiting, like she'd already said everything that mattered, and now it was his turn to respond. You said you had a letter for me, Kevin said. Dorothy nodded. She slid off the chair and walked around the desk, approaching him with the same careful reverence she'd shown Margaret downstairs. She held out the envelope with both hands. Kevin took it. The paper was old, wrinkled, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The handwriting on the front was shaky but clear. Kevin Barton, urgent and private. His name, written by someone whose hands had been trembling. He looked back at Dorothy. Who gave you this? My mom, Dorothy whispered. She said, you're the only person who can help us now. Kevin's chest tightened. He turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the weight of it. Something about this moment felt surreal, like the walls of his carefully controlled world were starting to crack. What's your mother's name? He asked. Dorothy's voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. Nancy Cromwell. The name hit him like a freight train. Kevin's hand froze. His breath caught. The envelope slipped slightly in his grip before he caught it again. Nancy Peterson. 8 years. It had been 8 years since he'd heard that name. 8 years since she'd walked out of his life without explanation. 8 years since he'd tried and failed to forget her. He stared at Dorothy with new eyes now, his mind racing. The timeline, the age, the resemblance. No, it wasn't possible. Dorothy was watching him carefully, her blue eyes searching his face for something. Recognition, maybe, or hope. You knew my mom? She asked softly. Kevin didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed up. Instead, he looked down at the envelope in his hands. His fingers traced the edge of it, feeling the worn paper, the desperate urgency in every crease. Then he tore it open. The scent hit him first. Lavender. Faint, but unmistakable. Nancy had always worn lavender perfume. It was the smell of summer nights and whispered promises and everything he'd tried to bury. Kevin pulled out the letter with unsteady hands. The handwriting was worse than the envelope. Shaky, uneven, like it had been written by someone fighting just to hold the pen. He began to read. Kevin, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll even let Dorothy into your building. But if you're reading these words right now, then maybe, just maybe, there's still a part of you that remembers me. I'm dying, Kevin. I know that's a terrible way to start a letter, but I don't have time to soften the truth anymore. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky. I should have told you 8 years ago. God, I should have told you so many things, but I was scared. I was broken, and I thought I was doing the right thing by walking away. That night, our last night together, I got pregnant. Kevin's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forcing himself to keep reading. I found out 2 weeks after I left. I was terrified. We'd just had that horrible fight. You said things, I said things, and I thought you hated me. But more than that, I remembered what you told me once, about the diagnosis, about how the doctor said you could never have children. So when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if you'd believe me. I didn't know if I even believed it myself. I was alone, Kevin, scared, and I made a choice. I left Seattle. I changed my name back to Cromwell. I had Dorothy by myself in a small hospital in Spokane on December 15th. December 15th. Kevin's hands were shaking now. She has your eyes, Kevin. She has your stubborn chin. She has this way of tilting her head when she's thinking, just like you used to. I tried to raise her alone. I tried to give her a good life, but the cancer came fast, and now I'm out of time. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to believe me. I'm just asking you to look at her, really look at her, and then decide for yourself. If there's any chance at all that Dorothy is yours, she deserves to know. She deserves to have someone when I'm gone. Please, Kevin, please find out the truth before it's too late. Nancy Kevin set the letter down on his desk with trembling hands. His mind was a storm. Every word Nancy had written contradicted everything he'd been told by doctors 9 years ago. Infertility. Irreversible. No chance of biological children. He'd accepted that truth, built his life around it, let it harden him. But now... He looked up at Dorothy. She was watching him with those impossibly familiar eyes, her small hands folded in her lap. "Did you read this?" Kevin asked, his voice rough. Dorothy shook her head. "Mom said it was private. She made me promise not to open it." Kevin exhaled slowly. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure completely shattered. 9 months after their last night together, December 15th. That was exactly 9 months, but it couldn't be true, could it? "Dorothy," Kevin said carefully, does she have anyone else helping her? A husband? A boyfriend?" Dorothy shook her head. "It's just been me and Mom. Always." Kevin's chest tightened. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The gray waters of Elliott Bay stretched out below him, endless and cold. Behind him, Dorothy's small voice broke the silence. "Are you mad at my mom?" Kevin turned. "What? Are you mad?" Dorothy repeated. Her eyes were glistening now, but she wasn't crying. "Because if you are, that's okay. But she really needs help. And I didn't know where else to go." The vulnerability in her voice cut through him like a blade. Kevin walked back to his desk and crouched down in front of Dorothy's chair so they were eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. The shape of her face, the way her eyebrows furrowed slightly when she was worried. "I'm not mad," Kevin said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Mom said you might not believe her. She said the doctors told you something a long time ago that made it hard." Kevin's breath hitched. Nancy had told her, not everything, but enough. "Your mom is very sick?" he asked gently. "Yes." Dorothy's voice cracked. "She tries to hide it, but I hear her crying at night, and sometimes she can't even stand up without holding on to something." Kevin felt something break inside his chest. Whether Dorothy was his daughter or not, this child had been carrying a weight no 7-year-old should bear. "Okay," Kevin said softly. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to help your mom. We're going to get her the best doctors, the best treatment." "Will it make her better?" Dorothy interrupted, hope flooding her face. Kevin hesitated. He wanted to promise her everything, but he'd learned long ago not to make promises he couldn't keep. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm going to try. And while I'm doing that, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Dorothy studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Kevin stood, pulling his phone from his pocket. His mind was already racing through logistics, medical specialists, private facilities, DNA testing. DNA testing. The thought made his stomach twist, because if Dorothy really was his daughter, then he'd missed 7 years of her life. A letter that changes everything. A child who looks too much like him to be coincidence. And a dying woman who might have been telling the truth all along. But how can Kevin trust what the doctors once told him was impossible? Kevin stood at his office window for a long time after Dorothy left with Linda, his assistant, who'd been instructed to take the girl to the employee lounge and get her something to eat. The letter sat on his desk behind him. The words burned into his memory. "She has your eyes, Kevin." He turned back and picked up the letter again, reading it more slowly this time. Every sentence felt like a punch. Nancy's handwriting deteriorated toward the end, shakier, more desperate. She'd probably written this in stages whenever she had the strength. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, weeks left. The Nancy he remembered had been vibrant, full of life, sharp-witted and fearless. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. And he'd loved her. God, he'd loved her so completely that when she left, it had nearly destroyed him. Kevin set the letter down and pressed his palms against the desk, his head dropping forward. The memory he'd spent 8 years trying to suppress came flooding back. 8 years ago, late September, they'd been together for almost a year, passionate, intense, the kind of relationship that burned hot and fast. But Kevin had just received the diagnosis: infertility. The doctors had been clear. His condition was irreversible. No biological children, ever. He'd told Nancy that night in his apartment, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. She'd been quiet at first, too quiet. Then she'd said something he'd never forgotten. So that's it. We just accept it? What choice do we have? He'd snap back, his own pain making him cruel. The fight had spiraled from there. Accusations, hurt, words neither of them could take back. Nancy had left that night, and 2 weeks later, when Kevin tried to reach her, she was gone. New number, no forwarding address, just gone. He'd tried to find her, hired investigators, checked hospitals, friends, family, but Nancy Peterson had vanished like smoke. Kevin straightened, his jaw tight. If what Nancy wrote was true, if Dorothy really was his, then she'd been pregnant when she disappeared, pregnant and alone because she thought he wouldn't believe her, because of what the doctors had told him. But medical science wasn't infallible. Diagnoses could be wrong. Miracles, however rare, did happen. Kevin pulled out his phone and dialed his personal physician. Dr. Raymond Chen picked up on the second ring. Kevin, what's going on? Raymond, I need you to pull my medical records from 9 years ago. The fertility consultation. There was a pause. Kevin, we discussed this. The diagnosis was, I know what it was. Kevin interrupted, but I need you to look at it again. I need to know if there was any margin of error, any possibility, however small, that it could have been wrong. Kevin, what's this about? Kevin exhaled slowly. There's a child, a 7-year-old girl. Her mother claims I'm the father. Silence on the other end. Then, I'll review the files and call you back within an hour. Thank you. Kevin ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Barton Tech Legal, this is Marcus. Marcus, it's Kevin. I need you to arrange a private DNA test. Maximum discretion. The lab should be independent, reputable, and fast. Of course. When do you need it? Today. Marcus didn't even hesitate. I'll have someone at your office within 2 hours. Kevin hung up and sank into his chair. The weight of the situation was starting to settle on him. If Dorothy was his daughter, then everything changed. His entire life, the careful walls he'd built, the emotional distance he'd maintained, all of it would crumble. But if she wasn't, if Nancy was lying, or mistaken, or if Dorothy belonged to someone else, Kevin's chest tightened. He didn't know which possibility scared him more. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in. Linda stepped inside, Dorothy trailing behind her. The little girl was holding a half-eaten cookie and looked slightly less exhausted than before. She ate a little, Linda said softly, and she asked if she could see you again. Kevin nodded. Thank you, Linda. That'll be all. Linda left, closing the door behind her. Dorothy walked over to the chair she'd sat in before and climbed back up. She set the cookie carefully on the edge of Kevin's desk, like she was afraid of making a mess. Did you read the whole letter? She asked. I did. Are you going to help my mom? Kevin looked at her, really looked at her. The hope in her eyes was almost painful to see. Yes, he said. I'm going to help, but I need to ask you some questions first. Is that okay? Dorothy nodded. Your mom mentioned that she was sick. How long has she been sick? A long time, Dorothy said quietly. Maybe 6 months. She didn't tell me at first, but I knew something was wrong because she stopped eating, and she got really tired. Does she have doctors? She did, but we ran out of money, so she stopped going. Kevin's hands clenched into fists under the desk. Nancy had been dying for months, suffering alone because she couldn't afford treatment. Dorothy, do you know if your mom has been in contact with anyone else? Any old friends? People from before you were born? Dorothy thought about it, her brow furrowing. There was a man once, a long time ago. Mom said he was a friend, but I don't remember his name. Kevin's stomach twisted. Was he around a lot? No, just once. I was really little. Maybe 4. 4 years ago. 3 years after Dorothy was born. Okay, Kevin said, forcing his voice to stay calm. One more question. Your birthday. It's December 15th. Yes. And your mom. Did she ever talk about your father? Dorothy's face fell. She looked down at her hands. She said he didn't know about me. She said it wasn't his fault. Kevin's throat tightened. She said he was a good person, Dorothy continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She said that if things had been different, he would have loved me. The words hit Kevin like a sledgehammer. He stood abruptly, walking to the window again because he couldn't sit still. His reflection stared back at him, a man who'd spent 8 years convinced he'd never be a father. And now there was a little girl sitting in his office who might prove every doctor wrong. Behind him, Dorothy spoke again. "Do you think my mom was telling the truth?" Kevin turned. "About what?" "About you being a good person." Kevin's breath caught. He crossed the room and crouched down in front of her chair again, meeting her eyes. "I don't know if I'm good," he said honestly, "but I do know this. From now on, I'm going to be here for you and your mom, no matter what happens. Do you understand?" Dorothy nodded, her eyes welling up for the first time since she'd arrived. "Can I see her?" she whispered. "I miss her." "Yes," Kevin said. "We'll go see her together, right now." He stood and reached for his phone, but before he could dial, it buzzed in his hand. Dr. Chen's name flashed on the screen. Kevin answered. "Raymond." Kevin, I reviewed the files. Dr. Chen's voice was careful, measured. The diagnosis 9 years ago was based on standard fertility testing, low sperm count, poor motility. But what? The tests weren't absolute. There was always a statistical possibility, extremely small, but not zero. If the conditions were exactly right, conception could occur naturally. Kevin's knees nearly gave out. "Are you saying it's possible?" "I'm saying it's not impossible, which means the only way to know for sure is DNA test," Kevin finished. "I know. It's already arranged." "Good. Kevin, be prepared for either outcome. This is going to be complicated, no matter what the results say." Kevin ended the call and looked at Dorothy. She was watching him with those blue eyes that looked so much like his own it hurt. "Are we going to see Mom now?" she asked. Kevin nodded. "Yes, let me grab my coat." As he pulled his jacket from the back of his chair, his phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus. "DNA specialist will arrive at 3 p.m. Portable lab setup. Results in 24 hours. Kevin pocketed the phone. 24 hours until he knew the truth. 24 hours until his entire life either shattered or rebuilt itself. He looked at Dorothy, who was sliding off the chair and smoothing down her dress. "Ready?" he asked. Dorothy nodded. And as they walked out of his office together, the powerful CEO and the little girl who'd walked into his building with nothing but a letter and hope, Kevin realized something. He'd already made his decision. DNA or no DNA, he wasn't going to let Nancy die alone. And he wasn't going to let Dorothy grow up without someone to protect her, because whether or not she was his blood, she was already under his skin. Kevin's black Mercedes glided through Seattle's afternoon traffic, but his mind was miles away. Dorothy sat in the passenger seat beside him, her small frame nearly swallowed by the leather interior. She'd been quiet since they left Barton Tech, occasionally glancing at him like she was trying to memorize his face. "How far is it?" Dorothy asked softly. "About 15 minutes, Kevin replied. "Capitol Hill." Dorothy nodded and turned to look out the window. Kevin caught the reflection of her face in the glass, anxious, hopeful, scared. His phone buzzed in the center console. He glanced at the screen. Susan Osborne calling. Kevin's jaw tightened. Susan. He'd completely forgotten about her in the chaos of the last 2 hours. They'd been seeing each other for almost a year now. Casual, convenient, uncomplicated. Susan was smart, polished, and understood his world in a way most people didn't. She was the VP of Strategic Development at a competing tech firm, which meant she knew exactly how demanding his schedule was. But right now, he couldn't deal with her. He declined the call. 30 seconds later, the phone buzzed again. A text this time. "Susan, Kevin, where are you? We had lunch plans. Your assistant said you canceled everything today?" Kevin typed back quickly. "Something urgent came up. I'll explain later." He put the phone face down in the console, but even as he did, he felt a twist of unease. Susan wasn't going to let this go easily. She didn't like being kept in the dark. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a worn apartment building in Capitol Hill. The neighborhood was older, the kind of place where paint peeled from window frames and the stairs creaked under your weight. Kevin parked on the street and looked up at the building. This was where Nancy had been living, where Dorothy had grown up. It was a far cry from the life Nancy could have had. Dorothy was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Mom's on the 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Kevin followed her up the narrow stairwell. The air smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking, garlic and something vaguely sweet. Dorothy moved quickly despite her small legs, clearly familiar with every step. When they reached 3B, Dorothy knocked softly. "Mom, it's me. I brought someone." There was a pause, then the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps. The door opened, and Kevin's breath stopped. Nancy stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. She was barely recognizable. The vibrant woman he'd loved 8 years ago had been replaced by someone hollow and fragile. Her dark curls, once thick and shining, hung thin and lifeless around her gaunt face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her cheekbones jutted out sharply, and her clothes hung loose on a frame that had wasted away. But when she saw him, her eyes widened. Those eyes, still holding traces of the fire he remembered, locked onto his. "Kevin," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a name spoken like a prayer. Dorothy slipped past her mother into the apartment. Nancy didn't move. She just stared at Kevin, her hand trembling against the doorframe. "I didn't think she'd find you," Nancy said, her voice thin and raspy. "I didn't think you'd come." Kevin stepped closer. "Nancy, I'm sorry." The words tumbled out of her, desperate and broken. "I'm so sorry. For leaving. For not telling you. For all of it." Kevin reached out and gently took her arm, steadying her. "Let's get you inside." Nancy nodded weakly, and Kevin helped her back into the small apartment. It was cramped, just a living room, a tiny kitchen, and what looked like one bedroom and bathroom down a short hallway. The furniture was old but clean. Dorothy's drawings covered the refrigerator. A worn blanket was draped over the couch like Nancy had been sleeping there recently. Kevin guided Nancy to the couch and helped her sit. She moved like every bone in her body hurt. Dorothy appeared from the bedroom with a glass of water. "Here, Mom." Nancy took it with shaking hands and sipped slowly. When she looked up at Kevin again, tears were streaming down her face. "I tried to do it alone," she said. "I tried so hard, but I can't anymore. I'm not strong enough." Kevin knelt down in front of her, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to be strong alone anymore. I'm here now." Nancy shook her head, more tears falling. "You don't understand. The doctor said you couldn't—" "I know what they said," Kevin interrupted gently. "But I'm looking at Dorothy, and I'm looking at you, and I need to know the truth." Nancy's hand found his, gripping it with surprising strength. "She's yours, Kevin. I swear to God, she's yours. There was never anyone else. Not before you, not after, just you." Kevin's throat tightened. He believed her. Despite everything, despite the years of silence, despite the impossibility of it, he believed her. But belief wasn't proof. "I've arranged for a DNA test," Kevin said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, a private lab." Nancy nodded, exhausted. "Whatever you need." Dorothy sat down on the other side of her mother, small and watchful. Nancy wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. Kevin stood looking at the two of them, a mother and daughter who'd survived alone for 7 years in this tiny apartment, while he'd lived in luxury less than 10 miles away. "I'm going to take care of everything," Kevin said. "Medical bills, treatment, whatever you need. Starting today." Nancy's face crumpled. "Kevin, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you." His voice was firm now, the CEO returning. "I have doctors on call, the best oncologists in Seattle. We're going to fight this." "It's stage 4, Nancy whispered. "There's nothing left to fight." "Then we'll buy you time," Kevin said. "However much we can get." Nancy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Kevin pulled out his phone and stepped into the kitchen, dialing Dr. Chen. While he spoke in low, urgent tones about hospice care, palliative treatment, and private nurses, he didn't notice the apartment door opening quietly behind him. Susan Osborne stepped inside. She was dressed impeccably, as always. Red sheath dress, heels, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun. But her expression was cold, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with calculating precision. Dorothy saw her first. "Who are you?" Susan's gaze snapped to the little girl. For just a fraction of a second, her composure slipped. Her face went pale. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then the mask returned. "I'm a friend of Kevin's," Susan said smoothly, stepping further into the apartment. "And you are?" Kevin turned, his phone still pressed to his ear. When he saw Susan, his expression hardened. He ended the call. "Susan, what are you doing here?" "Your assistant told me you left in a hurry," Susan said, her voice tight despite the smile on her face. "I was worried, so I tracked your phone." She gestured around the apartment, her eyes landing on Nancy. "I didn't realize you were visiting." Nancy struggled to stand, but Kevin was already moving toward Susan, his hand raised in a gesture that said, "Stay back." "This isn't a good time," Kevin said firmly. "Clearly." Susan's eyes moved between Nancy, Dorothy, and Kevin. "Are you going to introduce me?" Dorothy stood up, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Are you his wife?" The question hung in the air like a grenade. Susan's expression flickered, surprise, then something darker. She opened her mouth to answer, but Kevin spoke first. "No," he said. "She's not." Susan's jaw clenched. Dorothy looked confused. "Then who is she?" Kevin took a breath, about to explain, when Dorothy spoke again, her voice small but clear. "My mom is really sick. She needs help. That's why I went to find him." The words were simple, innocent, but they landed on Susan like an accusation. Susan stared at Dorothy, and for a moment something raw flashed across her face. Fear, maybe, or realization. "Kevin," Susan said slowly, her eyes still on Dorothy. "What is going on?" Kevin stepped between them. "Susan, you need to leave." "I'm not leaving until you tell me what this is." Her voice was rising now, the controlled facade cracking. "Who are these people? Why did you cancel everything today? Why?" "Because it's important," Kevin said, his voice hard as steel. "And that's all you need to know right now." Susan stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then her gaze shifted back to Dorothy, and Kevin saw it. The moment Susan put the pieces together, the resemblance, the age, the timing. "Oh my God," Susan whispered. "Kevin, is she—" "Susan." Kevin's voice was a warning. "Leave, now." For a moment, Susan looked like she might argue. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. Then she turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The apartment fell silent. Nancy's face had gone ashy, her body trembling. Dorothy looked frightened. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. He'd just made an enemy. Susan wasn't the type to let things go. She was calculating, ambitious, and she'd just realized that everything between them might be about to change. But right now, that didn't matter. Kevin turned back to Nancy and Dorothy. "I'm sorry about that." Nancy shook her head weakly. "Kevin, if she's important to you—" "She's not," Kevin said simply. And as he said it, he realized it was true. Whatever he and Susan had was surface level, convenient. Nothing compared to what he was feeling right now, standing in this cramped apartment with a dying woman and a little girl who might be his daughter. Dorothy walked over to him and slipped her small hand into his. "Are you really going to stay?" Kevin looked down at her, at those blue eyes that mirrored his own, and felt something crack open in his chest. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'm really going to stay." The evening light filtered through the thin curtains of Nancy's apartment, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. Kevin had spent the last hour on the phone, coordinating with doctors, arranging for a home health nurse, setting up payment plans for treatments Nancy had been forced to abandon months ago. Nancy sat on the couch, watching him with an expression that shifted between disbelief and cautious hope. Dorothy had fallen asleep beside her mother, her head resting on Nancy's lap, one small hand still clutching the fabric of Nancy's worn sweater. Kevin ended his latest call and sat down in the chair across from them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You didn't have to do all this," Nancy said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I did." "Kevin, the costs don't matter." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Nancy, why didn't you reach out? In all these years, why didn't you tell me?" Nancy's hand moved absently through Dorothy's hair, her fingers trembling slightly. "I was scared. After that fight we had, after you told me about the diagnosis. I thought you'd think I was lying, or worse, that I'd been with someone else. So you just disappeared. I thought it was easier." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought if I just vanished, you could move on. You could build your life without me dragging you down." Kevin shook his head slowly. "You were never dragging me down, Nancy. I loved you. I would have—" He stopped, his voice catching. "I would have been there. I know that now." Nancy's tears spilled over. "But back then, I was 24 years old and terrified. I didn't know what to do. So I ran. And then Dorothy was born, and she looked just like you, and I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Why didn't you come back then?" Pride, fear, shame. Nancy wiped at her face. Every year that passed made it harder. How do you show up after 2 years and say, "By the way, you have a daughter"? How do you do that after 3 years? 4? You could have sent a letter, an email, anything. "I tried," Nancy admitted. 3 times I wrote to you, but I never sent them, because by then you'd become this," she gestured vaguely, "this titan, Kevin Barton, CEO of Barton Tech, worth billions, in all the magazines. And I was just me, a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. What right did I have to walk back into your life?" Kevin felt his chest tighten. All those years, Nancy had been watching from a distance, seeing his success while she struggled alone. "You had every right," he said quietly, "because she's mine, isn't she?" Nancy nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "She's yours, Kevin. I swear on everything I have left. She's yours." Kevin stood and moved to the couch, sitting on the other side of Dorothy. He looked down at the sleeping child, at the way her soft, dark curls fell across her face, at the slight upturn of her nose, at the stubborn set of her jaw, even in sleep. "Tell me about her," he said. Nancy smiled through her tears. "She's stubborn, just like you. Once she makes up her mind about something, there's no changing it. She taught herself to read when she was 4 because I couldn't afford preschool. She's brilliant with numbers. She remembers everything, dates, names, conversations. And she's so kind, Kevin, so impossibly kind. She walked into my office today like she owned the place," Kevin said, the ghost of a smile on his face. "That's your confidence." Nancy laughed softly, then winced, her hand moving to her abdomen. "Are you in pain?" "Always." Nancy's voice was matter-of-fact, "but it's manageable. For now." Kevin's jaw tightened. "The doctors I spoke to, they said with aggressive palliative care, we might be able to—" "Kevin," Nancy's hand found his, "I know what the prognosis is. I've made my peace with it." "I haven't. You just found out about her today." "And I've already lost 7 years," Kevin said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm not losing more time if I can help it. Not with you, and not with her." Nancy stared at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "You were always too good. You know that? I'm not good. If I were good, I would have found you years ago. You didn't know. I should have tried harder." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, Dorothy sleeping between them. "The DNA test is tomorrow," Kevin said. "I need you to know, whatever the results say, I'm not walking away. Not from her, not from you." Nancy's breath hitched. "Kevin, you can't promise that. If the test comes back, and she's not—" "She is," Kevin said firmly. "I don't need a test to tell me what I can see with my own eyes, but I need to know for legal reasons. Custody, medical decisions, all of it." "Custody?" Nancy's voice cracked. Kevin met her eyes. "When you're gone, someone needs to take care of her, and that someone is going to be me." Nancy broke down completely then, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Kevin moved closer, wrapping an arm around her, careful not to wake Dorothy. "I don't deserve this," Nancy whispered against his shoulder. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Kevin said quietly, "but she deserves a father, and I intend to be one." They stayed like that for a long time, 2 people who'd loved each other once, torn apart by circumstance and fear, now brought back together by a little girl who'd been brave enough to walk into a skyscraper and demand help. Eventually, Dorothy stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at Kevin with sleepy confusion. "Did you stay?" she asked, her voice small. Kevin smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "I stayed." Dorothy sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Are you going to stay tomorrow too?" "Yes." "And the day after?" "Yes." "What about—" "Dorothy." Kevin gently cupped her small face in his hands. "I'm not going anywhere. Do you understand? From now on, I'm here, for you and your mom, no matter what." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "You promise?" "I promise." She threw her arms around his neck, and Kevin held her tight, this tiny person who'd somehow become the center of his universe in less than a day. Over Dorothy's shoulder, Kevin saw Nancy watching them, her face a mixture of relief and heartbreak. She was smiling, even as tears streamed down her face. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd been too afraid to ask for. And now, in her final weeks, she was finally seeing it. Kevin closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. Tomorrow, the DNA test would confirm what his heart already knew. Tomorrow, everything would become real in a way that couldn't be denied or questioned. But tonight, in this small apartment with peeling paint and worn furniture, Kevin Barton, billionaire CEO, tech titan man who'd built an empire, had finally found something worth more than all of it. He'd found his daughter, and he'd found the woman he'd never stopped loving, even if he'd spent 8 years trying to convince himself otherwise. Dorothy pulled back, looking at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Kevin?" "Yes?" "Thank you for coming when I asked." Kevin's throat tightened. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask." Nancy reached over and squeezed his hand. "The test is at 9 tomorrow morning, Dr. Chen's office." Kevin nodded. "I'll pick you both up at 8:30. "Both of us." "Both of you," Kevin confirmed. "We're doing this together." Nancy smiled, exhausted but genuinely happy for the first time in what looked like months. As Kevin stood to leave, Dorothy walked him to the door. She looked up at him, suddenly shy. "Can I—" She hesitated. "Can I call you Dad? Or is that weird?" Kevin's heart stopped. He knelt down so they were eye level. "You can call me whatever feels right," he said gently. "But I'd be honored if you called me Dad." Dorothy's face lit up with the brightest smile he'd seen from her all day. "Okay, Dad." The word hit him like a freight train. Dad. He was someone's dad. Kevin hugged her one more time, then left the apartment before the emotion overwhelmed him completely. As he walked down the narrow stairwell and out into the cool Seattle evening, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from Susan. "Susan, we need to talk. Tonight." Kevin stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Not tonight. I'll call you tomorrow." He pocketed the phone and climbed into his car, but he didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there in the driver's seat, staring at the worn apartment building where Nancy and Dorothy lived. 24 hours. That's all it would take to know for certain, but deep down, Kevin already knew the truth. Dorothy was his daughter, and tomorrow the world would know it too. Kevin drove back to his penthouse in silence, the city lights blurring past his windows. Rain had started, light and misty, making everything look softer than it was. When he pulled into the underground parking, his phone buzzed. A text from Susan. "Susan, I'm at your place. We need to talk now." Kevin's jaw tightened. He should have known she wouldn't let this go. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. All glass and steel, expensive furniture that looked like art. Cold. The opposite of Nancy's apartment. Susan stood by the windows overlooking Elliott Bay. She'd changed into dark jeans and a wine-colored sweater, her hair down in sleek waves. Beautiful, composed, but tense. "You didn't answer my texts," she said without turning. Kevin set his keys down. "I said I'd call tomorrow." "And I said we needed to talk tonight." Susan turned, arms crossed. "So here I am." Kevin poured himself scotch before sitting on the couch. "Susan, it's been a long day." "I know." She picked up her iPad from the coffee table and walked over. "Which is why I spent 3 hours researching. You need to see this." Kevin's stomach dropped. She pulled up a document and turned the screen toward him. "This is a marriage certificate. Nancy Peterson married Robert Fitzpatrick 5 years ago." Kevin stared at the names. Nancy's signature, another man's. "She was married," Susan continued, her voice softer now. "Kevin, I know you want to believe her, but look at the facts. She disappeared 8 years ago, had a child, married someone else, and now she shows up claiming you're the father." Kevin's hands tightened around his glass. "This doesn't prove. It proves she had a whole life you knew nothing about." Susan sat beside him, their knees almost touching. "You're one of the most powerful men in Seattle, worth billions. And suddenly this woman from your past appears with a child. It's textbook manipulation." "She didn't appear. Her daughter did." "Even worse." Susan's hand moved to his arm. "That little girl is 7. She's been coached. She knew exactly where to find you, exactly what to say. Nancy knew you'd never turn away a child." Kevin pulled away and walked to the window, rain streaking down the glass. "You didn't see her face," he said quietly. "You didn't see Nancy." "I saw enough. A desperate woman, sick, broke, out of options." Susan stood. "And I saw you, willing to throw everything away because of blue eyes and a resemblance. The timeline matches. Dorothy was born exactly 9 months after you broke up, yes. But Kevin, the doctor said you can't have children. That's medical fact." "Medical facts can be wrong." Susan walked to him, her expression shifting to concern. I know you want this to be true. I know what it would mean, but you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. I've ordered a DNA test, Kevin said flatly. Tomorrow morning. Something flickered across Susan's face, too quick to read. Good. That's smart. And when it comes back negative, I'll be here. Kevin looked at her. What if it doesn't come back negative? Susan's smile didn't reach her eyes. Then I'll be happy for you. But I really don't think that's going to happen. Morning came too fast. Kevin picked up Nancy and Dorothy at 8:30. Dorothy waved excitedly from the window. Nancy looked worse, her skin gone ashy, her body more fragile. The drive to Dr. Chen's clinic was filled with Dorothy's nervous chatter. Nancy held Kevin's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Dr. Chen collected the samples quickly, efficiently. Dorothy asked questions about DNA, while the doctor answered patiently, clearly charmed. You should have results by this afternoon, Dr. Chen said. Back at the apartment, Dorothy hugged Kevin. You're going to be my dad. I know you are. The certainty in her voice made his chest ache. At Barton Tech, Kevin couldn't focus. Every meeting felt pointless. Every email trivial. All he could think about was the test. At 3:15, his phone rang. Dr. Chen. Kevin, we have preliminary results. Hesitation in his voice. The test shows no biological relationship between you and Dorothy Cromwell. The words hit like a physical blow. Kevin's knees weakened. That's not possible. I know this isn't what you wanted. Run it again. There's a mistake. Kevin, the results were very clear. No genetic match. I'm sorry. Kevin ended the call and sat frozen. The city sprawled below, indifferent. Not his daughter. His phone buzzed. Nancy calling. Kevin, did they call? Yes. Flat. Dead. And? Negative. No biological relationship. Silence. Then a sob. That's not possible. Kevin, I swear, I have to go. He hung up. He sat alone as afternoon light faded. His phone kept buzzing. Nancy calling. Messages he didn't read. At 6, his office door opened. Susan walked in with wine and 2 glasses. She poured without asking. I heard, she said softly. Dr. Chen's office called mine by mistake. I'm so sorry. Kevin took the glass but didn't drink. You were right. I wish I wasn't. Susan sat on his desk, hand on his shoulder. I know how much you wanted this. She seemed so certain. Desperate people are good liars, especially for their children. Susan's voice was gentle. She probably convinced herself it was true. Kevin looked at her. Dorothy asked if I'd come back. She was so sure. That's why this is cruel. She doesn't understand what her mother tried to do. What if the test was wrong? Kevin, Susan's voice firmed. DNA tests don't lie. You know what the doctor said about your condition. She moved closer, hand sliding to his cheek. You did everything right. You tried to help, but you can't let yourself be manipulated. Kevin wanted to argue, but the test didn't lie. Susan's thumb traced his cheekbone. Let me help you move past this. She poured more wine and spoke in soothing tones about moving forward, protecting himself, knowing when to walk away. Across the city, Dorothy sat beside her crying mother and wondered why Kevin hadn't called back. Night fell over Seattle. Kevin stood in his office, scotch in hand, his third barely tasted. Susan had left an hour ago after making him promise to sleep, but sleep felt impossible. Kevin's mind kept returning to Dorothy looking up at him. You're going to be my dad. I know you are. How could she have been so sure if it wasn't true? His phone sat face down on the desk. He'd turned off the ringer after Nancy's 5th call. The screen lit up. A text from an unknown number. Kevin frowned and opened it. A photo. Child's handwriting on lined paper. Letters big and uneven. Uncle Kevin, are you mad at me and Mommy? Did I do something wrong? Kevin's heart stopped. Another message. Another photo. I'm sorry if I bothered you. Mommy is crying again. His hand started shaking. Will you still be my dad, or is that not allowed now? The phone nearly slipped. He sat down heavily. More messages came. I know the test said no, but I still look like you. Mommy says you're probably busy. That's okay. Then the one that shattered him. You said you wouldn't leave, but I guess grown-ups say things they don't mean sometimes. Kevin's vision blurred. This child, who'd walked into his office with nothing but hope, was sitting alone right now, thinking she'd done something wrong. He stood, pacing to the window. Rain streaked the glass. Dr. Chen's words echoed. The test shows no biological relationship. But what if there was another reason? Kevin found Dr. Chen's number, almost 11, late to call, but before he could decide, another message appeared. I'm going to stop writing now. I'm sorry for bothering you. Good night, Uncle Kevin. Uncle Kevin, not Dad anymore. Kevin called Dr. Chen immediately. Kevin, it's almost 11. The DNA test. Were there any irregularities? Anything unusual? A pause. What do you mean? Was the process clean? Could anything have interfered? Longer pause. Dr. Chen was probably sitting up. What's this about? Just answer. The results were clear, but there was something odd. Some markers were inconsistent, like sample contamination. Kevin's pulse quickened. Contamination. Not uncommon in rushed tests. External DNA can affect results, but contamination typically makes tests inconclusive, not negative. Who had access to the samples? Just lab staff. And Dr. Chen hesitated. Someone called asking about our security protocols the day before. A woman. She said she was verifying procedures for a client. Kevin's blood ran cold. What woman? She didn't give a name, but she knew specific details about your case. I assumed she was from your legal team. What did she look like? I didn't see her. She called. But Kevin, our lab had a brief power outage during processing. 32 seconds. When systems came back, one of the samples showed signs of contamination. Kevin's mind raced. Susan had been insistent about the test. She'd shown up immediately after with research about Nancy. She'd been at his penthouse when he got the results. Which sample was contaminated? Kevin asked, his voice tight. Yours. Kevin closed his eyes. Raymond, I need another test. Different lab. Maximum security. No one can know about it. Kevin, what's going on? Just set it up. Tomorrow, and don't tell anyone. Not your staff, not your office, no one. All right, I'll arrange it first thing. Kevin hung up and stared at his phone. Susan's text from earlier still glowed on the screen. I'll be here when you need me. He thought about her reaction when she first saw Dorothy, the way her face had gone pale, the fear in her eyes. He thought about her showing up at Nancy's apartment, tracking his phone, the marriage certificate she'd found so conveniently, and he thought about that phone call to the lab. Kevin grabbed his keys. He drove through the rain-slicked streets, his mind crystallizing with each mile. By the time he pulled up to Nancy's apartment, it was nearly midnight. He took the stairs 2 at a time. When he knocked, Nancy answered immediately, like she'd been waiting by the door. Her eyes were red and swollen. Kevin, I need to ask you something, he interrupted. The test. Did anyone contact you about it? Ask questions? Offer to help? Nancy shook her head, confused. No. Why? Behind her, Dorothy appeared in pajamas, her face lighting up when she saw him. You came back, she whispered. Kevin knelt down. I'm sorry I didn't call, but Dorothy, I need you to know something. That test, I don't think it was right. Nancy's hand flew to her mouth. What? I think someone interfered with it. Kevin looked up at her. I'm running another one tomorrow. Private lab. Complete security. But who would... Nancy's eyes widened. That woman, Susan, she was asking me questions when you were on the phone. About Dorothy's father. About our history. Kevin's jaw clenched. What did you tell her? Nothing. I didn't trust her. Kevin stood, his decision made. The new test is at 9 tomorrow morning. Until then, I'm staying here. Kevin, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked at Dorothy. Because I made a promise, and I don't break promises. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears as she threw her arms around him. Over her head, Kevin met Nancy's gaze. She was crying too, relief and hope warring on her face. Thank you, she whispered. Kevin held Dorothy close, his mind already planning. Tomorrow would bring answers, real answers. And if Susan had done what he suspected, if she'd sabotaged that test, she was about to discover that Kevin Barton didn't forgive betrayal, not when it involved his daughter. Kevin woke on Nancy's worn couch at 6 in the morning, his neck stiff from the awkward angle. Pale light filtered through the thin curtains. He could hear movement in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, water running. Nancy appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She looked exhausted but steadier than yesterday, like hope had given her temporary strength. You didn't have to sleep on the couch, she said quietly, handing him a mug. I wanted to be here. Kevin sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Where's Dorothy? Still sleeping. She didn't fall asleep until past midnight. She kept checking to make sure you were still here." Kevin's chest tightened. That little girl had been so afraid he'd disappear again. Nancy sat in the chair across from him, cradling her own mug. "Kevin, what you said last night about someone interfering with the test, are you sure?" "Not completely, but there were too many coincidences." Kevin pulled out his phone and scrolled to Susan's texts. "Susan showed up at my office right after I got the results. She had details only someone with access would know, and she'd been asking questions." "But why would she do that?" Kevin met Nancy's eyes. "Because she saw Dorothy. She saw how much Dorothy looks like me, and she realized that if the test came back positive, everything between us would change." "Were you serious? About her?" "I thought I was, but compared to what I felt the moment I saw Dorothy." Kevin shook his head. "There's no comparison." Nancy's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry I put you in this position." "Don't." Kevin's voice was firm. "Don't apologize anymore. We're past that now." At 7:30, Dorothy emerged from the bedroom in mismatched pajamas, her dark curls wild around her face. When she saw Kevin still there, her entire face lit up. "You stayed," she said, like she still couldn't quite believe it. "I stayed." Kevin opened his arms and Dorothy ran over, climbing onto the couch beside him. "Are we doing another test today?" she asked, looking up at him. "Yes, but this time it's going to be different. No one's going to know except us." Dorothy nodded seriously, like she understood the weight of what he was saying. At 8:30, Kevin's phone rang. "Dr. Chen." "I've arranged everything," the doctor said quietly. "Different facility, private entrance. The lab director owes me a favor. She's overseeing this personally. No one else will touch the samples." "Thank you, Raymond." "Kevin, I have to ask, do you really think someone tampered with yesterday's test?" Kevin looked at Nancy and Dorothy. "I think someone tried to, but they failed." The new facility was across town, tucked away in a medical complex that looked nothing like Dr. Chen's upscale clinic. Kevin pulled into an underground parking garage and led Nancy and Dorothy through a side entrance. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and steady hands met them in a private room. Dr. Patricia Reeves introduced herself with a no-nonsense efficiency Kevin appreciated. Dr. Chen explained the situation, she said, snapping on latex gloves. "I'm handling this personally. No assistants, no intermediaries, just me." She collected the samples with careful precision, labeling everything herself, locking them in a secure case. "Results in 6 hours," Dr. Reeves said. "I'm running this through our fastest protocol, but I'm not cutting corners. You'll have accurate results by 3 o'clock this afternoon." Kevin thanked her, and they left through the same private entrance. In the car, Dorothy was quiet, subdued. Nancy reached back from the front seat to hold her daughter's hand. "What are you thinking, sweetie?" Nancy asked gently. "What if this test says no too?" Dorothy's voice was small. "What if I'm just not his?" Kevin pulled the car over abruptly, parking on a quiet side street. He turned to face Dorothy. "Listen to me," he said, his voice intense but gentle. "I don't care what any test says anymore. Do you understand? I made you a promise, and I'm keeping it. Test or no test, I'm not going anywhere. But if you're not my dad, then I'll be whatever you need me to be. An uncle, a guardian, a friend. But I will be in your life. That's not negotiable." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I'd rather you be my dad." "Me too, kiddo. Me too." They spent the rest of the morning at Nancy's apartment. Kevin made calls to arrange home nursing care and consulted with oncologists about treatment options. Nancy tried to protest the expense, but Kevin shut her down with a look. "This isn't up for debate," he said simply. At noon, his phone buzzed. Not Dr. Reeves. "Susan. Susan, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all morning." Kevin stared at the message, anger building in his chest. He typed back, "We need to talk. My office. 1 hour. Susan. Finally." I was starting to worry. Kevin pocketed his phone. "I need to go handle something. I'll be back before 3. Nancy understood immediately. "Be careful. Always." Susan was already waiting in his office when Kevin arrived at Barton Tech. She stood by the window in a crisp black dress, perfectly styled as always. When she turned, her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "I'm glad you finally called," she said, walking toward him. "I was worried after yesterday. How are you holding up?" Kevin closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. I need you to answer a question honestly. Susan's smile faltered slightly. Of course. What is it? Did you call the lab where we ran the DNA test? Ask about security protocols. The color drained from Susan's face. Just for a second, a flicker of panic before her mask returned. What? Kevin, no. Why would I? Don't lie to me. Kevin's voice was cold, controlled. Someone called asking detailed questions about my case. The same day, the lab had a power outage. My sample was contaminated. Too many coincidences, Susan. Susan's mouth opened, closed, her hands clenched at her sides. Kevin, you're not thinking clearly. You're upset about the results, and you're looking for someone to blame. The power outage lasted exactly 32 seconds. Kevin continued, stepping away from the door. Just long enough to access the system if you knew what you were doing. And you have connections at that facility, don't you? Your company uses that same lab for clinical trials. Susan's facade cracked, her perfect composure shattered. So what if I called? So what if I asked questions? I was protecting you. Protecting me? Kevin's voice rose. By sabotaging a DNA test? By making me think a little girl wasn't my daughter? She's not. Susan's voice turned sharp, desperate. Kevin, the doctor said you're infertile. That's a fact. And this woman you haven't seen in 8 years, shows up with a convenient story and a child who needs money. Can't you see what's happening? What's happening is that you tried to manipulate me. I tried to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Susan stepped closer, her eyes wild now. You were going to throw everything away. Your career, your focus, everything you've built. For what? A woman who left you and a child who probably isn't even yours? Kevin's hands clenched into fists. That's not your decision to make. Someone had to make it. You weren't thinking straight. You saw a little girl with blue eyes and you lost all sense of reality. Susan's voice cracked. I love you, Kevin. I couldn't stand by and watch you destroy yourself. You don't love me. Kevin's voice was quiet but final. You love what I represent. The power, the status. And you were terrified of losing it. Susan's face twisted with rage and hurt. You're going to regret this. That woman is using you. That child isn't yours. And when the second test comes back negative, because it will, you're going to realize I was right. But by then, I'll be gone. Then go. Kevin walked to his desk and picked up his phone. Because we're done, professionally and personally, I'll have HR draft your termination paperwork by end of day. Susan stared at him, breathing hard. You can't fire me. I don't even work for you. No, but I control 40% of your company's investment portfolio, and as of now, I'm pulling every penny. Kevin's voice was ice. Good luck explaining that to your board. Susan's face went white. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since Kevin had known her, she had nothing to say. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. The door slammed behind her. Kevin stood alone in his office, his phone buzzing in his hand. A text from Dr. Reeves. Dr. Reeves, results are ready. Can you come in? Kevin checked the time. 2:45, 15 minutes early. His heart hammered as he typed back, on my way. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, his mind racing. In less than 20 minutes, he'd know the truth, the real truth. No interference, no manipulation, just DNA and science and answers. Kevin drove faster than he should have, weaving through afternoon traffic with barely controlled urgency. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Texts from Nancy asking if he'd heard anything, messages from his assistant about meetings he'd blown off. He ignored all of it. When he pulled up to Nancy's apartment, both she and Dorothy were waiting on the front steps. Nancy looked pale but resolute. Dorothy clutched her mother's hand, her small face tight with anxiety. Kevin got out of the car. Dr. Reeves called. The results are ready. Nancy's breath caught. Dorothy squeezed her mother's hand tighter. Let's go find out together, Kevin said, and they climbed into his car without a word. The drive to the facility was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall. Kevin kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Dorothy, who sat very still, staring out of the window like she was trying to memorize the world before it changed. At the lab, Dr. Reeves met them in the same private room as before. She held a sealed envelope, and her expression was carefully neutral. Before I give you these results, Dr. Reeves said, looking directly at Kevin, I want you to know that this test was conducted under the strictest protocols. No contamination, no errors. What's in this envelope is definitive. Kevin's throat was dry. "Thank you." Dr. Reeves held out the envelope. Kevin took it, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Nancy had moved closer, one arm around Dorothy's shoulders. The little girl's blue eyes were locked on the envelope. Kevin's fingers trembled as he broke the seal. He pulled out the single sheet of paper, his eyes scanning the technical language, the columns of numbers, looking for the only line that mattered. And then he found it. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The words blurred. Kevin read them again, making sure his eyes weren't playing tricks. 99.97%. Kevin? Nancy's voice was barely audible. "What does it say?" Kevin looked up at her, and Nancy must have seen something in his face because her knees buckled. Kevin caught her, one arm supporting her as his other hand still clutched the paper. "She's mine," he whispered. "Nancy, she's mine." Nancy's hands flew to her mouth as sobs tore from her throat. She collapsed against Kevin's chest, her whole body shaking. Dr. Reeves smiled softly. "Congratulations, Mr. Barton. You have a daughter." Dorothy stood frozen, her eyes huge. I'm really your daughter?" Kevin knelt down in front of her, still holding Nancy with one arm. "Yes, you're really my daughter." Dorothy's face crumpled, and then she was crying too, throwing herself into Kevin's arms with such force it nearly knocked him over. He held both of them, Nancy and Dorothy, the two people who'd just become his entire world. "I knew it," Dorothy sobbed against his shoulder. "I knew you were my dad. I could feel it." Kevin's own eyes burned with tears. He couldn't hold back anymore. "You were right, sweetheart. You were right all along." They stayed like that for a long moment, the three of them wrapped together while Dr. Reeves quietly stepped out to give them privacy. When they finally pulled apart, Nancy was smiling through her tears, her hand cupped against Kevin's face. I told you she was yours." "I should have believed you from the beginning," Kevin said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry I doubted you, even for a second." "You had every reason to doubt." Nancy's thumb brushed away a tear on his cheek. "But you came back. That's what matters." Dorothy tugged on Kevin's sleeve. "Can I call you Dad now? For real?" Kevin pulled her close again. "You can call me Dad forever." Dorothy's smile was brighter than anything Kevin had ever seen. "Okay, Dad." The word hit him square in the chest. Dad. He was someone's dad. He had a daughter. A brilliant, brave, beautiful daughter who'd walked into his office and changed his entire life. They drove back to Nancy's apartment as the rain intensified, drumming against the windshield. But inside the car, everything felt warm and bright and impossibly right. When they climbed the stairs to the third floor, Dorothy was practically bouncing. "Dad, can you stay for dinner? Mom makes really good spaghetti." "Well, it's just spaghetti with butter, but it's good." "I'd love to stay," Kevin said, and Dorothy squealed with delight. Inside the small apartment, Nancy moved slowly to the kitchen while Dorothy gave Kevin a tour of her bedroom, showing him her books, her drawings, the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was a baby. "This is Mr. Trunks," Dorothy explained seriously. "He's been with me forever. Mom says I had him even when I was born." Kevin sat on the edge of Dorothy's small bed, looking around at the tiny room that had been his daughter's whole world. The walls were decorated with her artwork. A nightlight shaped like a star sat on the dresser. Everything was worn but loved. "Dorothy," Kevin said gently, "how would you feel about getting a bigger room? Maybe a house with a backyard?" Dorothy's eyes went wide. "You mean we'd move?" "Only if you and your mom want to, but I have a big house and it's been very empty. It could use some people in it." "Would Mom come too?" "Of course. We're a family now. We stay together." Dorothy launched herself at him again, hugging him tight. "I've always wanted a backyard. And a dog." "Can we get a dog?" Kevin laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in days. "We can definitely talk about a dog." In the kitchen, Nancy had managed to boil water despite her shaking hands. Kevin found her leaning against the counter, exhausted but smiling. "Let me," he said, gently taking over. He finished cooking while Nancy sat at the small table, watching him with an expression that was equal parts wonder and sadness. "You don't have to do this," Nancy said quietly. "Take care of us like this. We managed before." "Nancy." Kevin turned to face her. "I've missed 7 years of Dorothy's life. 7 years of birthdays and first days of school and scraped knees and bedtime stories. I can't get that back, but I can be here for everything going forward. and I can make sure you get every possible treatment, every chance to be here as long as possible." Nancy's eyes filled with tears again. "Kevin, the cancer is stage 4, the doctor said." "The doctors say a lot of things, and sometimes they're wrong." Kevin moved to the table and took her hands. "Remember, they said I couldn't have children, but I do. I have Dorothy. So we're going to fight this together." Nancy squeezed his hands. "I'm so tired of fighting." "Then let me fight for you. Let me be strong when you can't be." Nancy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Okay, okay." Dorothy appeared in the doorway. "Is the spaghetti ready?" "Almost," Kevin said, turning back to the stove. They ate dinner at the cramped kitchen table. Mismatched plates, butter spaghetti, water in plastic cups. It was nothing like the expensive restaurants Kevin usually frequented, but it was perfect. Dorothy talked nonstop about school, her friends, a book she was reading about dolphins. Nancy listened with soft smiles, occasionally correcting details. Kevin absorbed every word, memorizing everything about his daughter, the way she talked with her hands, the slight lisp on her S's, the brightness in her eyes when she was excited. This was his family, his actual family. After dinner, Dorothy started to fade, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She kept blinking slowly, fighting to stay awake, wanting to hold on to this moment as long as possible. "Come on, sweetheart," Nancy said gently. "Time for bed." "But Dad just got here," Dorothy protested, looking at Kevin with pleading eyes. "I'll be here tomorrow," Kevin promised, "and the day after that." "Really? Really?" Dorothy seemed satisfied with that. She hugged Kevin goodnight, her small arms wrapped tight around his neck, like she was still afraid he might disappear if she let go. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. Kevin's throat closed up. He held her closer, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I love you too, Dorothy, more than you could ever know." Nancy took Dorothy to bed, and Kevin could hear their quiet voices from the bedroom, the familiar rhythm of a mother and daughter's nighttime routine. He stood in the small kitchen, washing dishes that didn't need washing, trying to process everything that had happened. He had a daughter. The thought kept circling in his mind, refusing to feel completely real, even though he'd held the DNA results in his own hands. When Nancy returned, she was moving even slower than before, one hand pressed against the wall for support. Kevin was at her side immediately. "Let me help you." "I'm okay," Nancy said, but she let him guide her to the couch anyway. She sank into it with a small sigh of relief, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion it had been fighting all day. Kevin sat beside her, close but careful. "How are you really doing?" Nancy's smile was tired but genuine. Today I'm the happiest I've been in 8 years. Even with all of this." She gestured vaguely at her own frail body. "We're going to fight this, Nancy. I meant what I said." "I know you did." Nancy turned to look at him, her eyes soft. "But Kevin, you need to prepare yourself. Stage 4 means... It means we need the best oncologists in the country. It means experimental treatments, clinical trials, whatever gives you more time." Kevin took her hand carefully. "I'm not giving up on you. Dorothy needs her mother." "She needs her father more," Nancy said quietly. "And now she has you. That's all I ever wanted for her. She needs both of us." Nancy leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that in comfortable silence. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic outside and the occasional creak of old pipes. "I never stopped loving you, you know," Nancy whispered, "even when I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by staying away. Even when I saw your picture in magazines and told myself you were better off without me. I never stopped." Kevin's hand tightened around hers. "I spent 8 years trying to bury what I felt for you, built walls, kept everyone at a distance. And then Dorothy walked into my office and every single wall came crashing down." "She has that effect," Nancy said with a soft laugh. "She's stubborn like you, and brave like you." They sat together until Nancy's breathing deepened, her body relaxing into sleep against his shoulder. Kevin stayed perfectly still, afraid to wake her. She looked so fragile like this, her brown skin gone dull and ashy in the dim light, but there was still strength in the set of her jaw, the way her fingers curled around his. This was the woman he'd loved, still loved if he was being honest with himself. Carefully, Kevin shifted and helped Nancy lie down on the couch, covering her with the worn blanket. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Kevin checked on Dorothy one more time. She was fast asleep, curled around Mr. Trunks, her face peaceful. He stood in the doorway of her small room, watching her breathe, still trying to wrap his mind around the fact that this extraordinary little person was his daughter. Before he left, he wrote a quick note and left it on the kitchen counter. Gone home to handle some things. I'll be back at 9 a.m. Rest, both of you. K. As Kevin walked down the narrow stairwell and out into the cool night air, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting another message from his assistant about the chaos he'd left behind at work. But it wasn't work. It was an email from Dr. Chen sent to both him and Dr. Reeves with the subject line regarding yesterday's test results. Official investigation initiated. Kevin opened it, his jaw tightening as he read. Kevin, after reviewing the irregularities from yesterday's test and your concerns about possible interference, I've initiated a formal investigation with the lab. Security footage from the day of testing shows an unauthorized access to the storage facility during the power outage. We're working with authorities to identify the individual. I wanted you to know we're taking this seriously. The integrity of medical testing is paramount. Kevin stopped on the sidewalk, staring at his phone. Susan. They'd have evidence now, proof of what she'd done. He should feel vindicated, angry, something. But all he felt was tired and grateful it was over. He pocketed his phone and looked back up at the apartment building. Light glowed softly from Nancy's window. Behind that window were the two most important people in his world now. Tomorrow, he'd start making plans. Better medical care for Nancy, a new home for all of them, arranging his work schedule so he could be present in Dorothy's life. There would be lawyers to consult about custody, schools to consider, 1,000 practical details to manage. But tonight, he just wanted to hold on to this feeling, the feeling of finally, after 8 years of emptiness, being complete. Kevin climbed into his car and drove through the quiet Seattle streets toward his penthouse. But as he pulled into his building's garage, he realized something. That massive, expensive, perfectly designed space wasn't home anymore. Home was a cramped third-floor apartment with peeling paint and worn furniture. Home was a 7-year-old girl who looked just like him. Home was a woman he'd never stopped loving, even when he'd tried. And tomorrow, he'd start building a real home for all of them, together.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.